are many, arguably the most important people in the room, the student participants on this panel. So could I call upon Gurpreet Singh, who is in Camden College. Please come down and join us. Manish Kumar, UBC Okanagan. Mitali Madhusmita, UBC Vancouver.
Local champion.
Sorry?
I'm saying our local champion.
Our local champion. Absolutely. I have things actually to say about all of them and the incredible work that they're all involved in. Basra Nagar, University of Calgary. And of course, Dr. Satyendra Benz. We have called upon you a lot, but I want to be in conversation with you. Could you please join us?
Okay.
Maybe we could all sit down and start our conversation. Yeah. Just. I just want to say, I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to say a few things about why we're here and why we thought this panel was important to include as part of the symposium. I mean, and in a sense, we're sort of preaching to the choir when we do that. But there are still people out there who wonder if caste is still alive, whether it's still relevant, whether it is relevant outside of India, and so forth. When in fact the truth is that there have been several recorded instances of caste-based discrimination here in Canada. There have been several news reports, especially in the last few years, that have come out that have recorded instances of discrimination on the basis of caste. And the sad thing is that a lot of these, in a lot of these cases, students have been at the receiving end of discrimination. Baba Sahib said that really the cultivation of the mind should be the ultimate goal, right? Like the ultimate reason, really, or aim for human existence. And it is in these sites of education where minds are being cultivated that students are still at the receiving end of a great deal of discrimination. This is obviously true in India. Rohit Vemula is only the most spectacular cases, and almost every few days we hear of students taking their own lives in the various IITs across India. But therefore, to establish really that caste discrimination is not a thing of the past, it is very relevant, it is very present in India and elsewhere. But I think, sorry, I don't mean to make this incredibly dark, because to start with, it's important to acknowledge that this happens. And at the same time, especially over the last few years, we've been seeing some incredible organizing around caste-based discrimination in these university spaces. I'm thinking about several universities in the US that have officially included caste as part of their anti-discrimination policy. We're talking about Brown University, Brandeis, I think Colby College, California State, Harvard recently, and so many others who have gone ahead and acknowledged that caste is a relevant problem that needs to be sort of paid attention to so that the student body can be adequately protected. In Canada, very recently, we had the Toronto District School Board also pass a motion to ban caste-based discrimination, and this came about because young students at school were using casteist slurs against each other, and parents had to take notice of that and step in to propose this at the board. And then, of course, we had, with the leadership of Dr. Chinaya Jangal, Carleton University also recognized caste as a protected category in its academic association. Therefore, there's a lot of incredible work that's already happening, where we find ourselves at a very important moment. Something really momentous just happened in Seattle. There's a lot of conversations here in BC, which is why, and it's because of the incredible work of community organizations like Chetna, that now April is Dalit History Month in BC. April 2022 was, in any case, and recently the BC Human Rights Tribunal awarded a man $9,000 in damages because he faced casteism at the hands of his other South Asian colleagues. So we find ourselves at a moment where this conversation is important and necessary to have. I know that at UBC and at UFV, we are really interested in pushing for caste as a protected category. I actually have a couple of petitions here, draft petitions on behalf of both university spaces that I'm going to hand out. So if you can please sign as a mark of your support, it would go a great deal for our advocacy efforts. I'm going to really stop talking, because who we have here, I think, are a set of really inspiring student leaders who are doing really incredible work in the face of a great many challenges. Mitali here works on figuring out how we might achieve caste as a protected category here at UBCB. Gurpreet has been speaking up about caste at so many fora. Vipassana's involved in the Caste in Canada research project. Dr. Ben's is doing amazing work, but also Manish at the end there works at the UBC Equity and Inclusion Office on the Okanagan campus. So these are incredible people to hear from, and I'm really excited. I have a set of broad questions here that you can choose to answer that I came up with Dr. Benz and Mitali. We sat in a room and kind of came up with this together. So maybe I'll start with asking a broad sort of question, because this is the first time perhaps that we are going to attempt a documentation of student experiences of caste in Canada. I don't think we've had this type of opportunity before. So I'll start with the first question, which is, how does caste impact student experiences at the university in India and globally? What inspired you to start speaking up about it, becoming involved in taking actions to address caste in academic settings? And what are some of the hopeful outcomes that you're looking for? Anyone can start. This is not super formal.
तो पहले आप पे ना गाड़ी छूट जाएगी. Tech name.
So hi everyone, I'm Mitali. I'm currently pursuing Masters of Public Policy and Global Affairs, and most of my projects are based on how to tackle caste-based discrimination and its related issues. I think back in India, I was a student in Delhi University, and I had one of those friends who belonged to the communities, and I knew he was struggling to pay even for his tuition, and really Delhi University usually has very low tuition. We used to study together, but I remember this particular incident in a maths practical class in which you're basically graded for your test on the right there in the room, and so we all appeared for the test, and I remember him getting a full mark. Just then, one of my other friends who belonged to the upper castes, he did not get full marks, and mind you, he was a CA student. And since the course was in commerce, CA students learn these courses in depth, but he got less than half marks. And one thing, right before he walked out of the classroom, he said, हम इतना पढ़ के मार्क्स नहीं लाते, लेकिन ये कहाँ से उठ के आ जाते हैं कोटे की वजह से और ऐसे निकल जाते हैं. And this did not make any sense. And I think caste affecting a child in a classroom means a lot, because it ultimately affects a child's relationship with the school and education, and that can last for a long time. And these things just don't go away. These are generations of trauma, and as much as we speak about it, it does not go away, because at the end of the day, even, have you noticed this thing? Even if a Dalit student commits suicide, they don't, the tag doesn't go back. The tag doesn't go. Even in the newspapers, the first thing that it says is Dalit student commits suicide. They don't say student commits suicide because of caste-based discrimination. they describe you as a Dalit student who committed suicide. So I think addressing caste, even at the very lowest level of education, is the first step towards having a caste-free society, or at least improving the relationship between a child and its education in the long run. So it lets one person can help in further flourishing an entire community and inspiring it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all and organizing committee for giving me this opportunity. I would like to state that this is my first time holding a mic, and my voice would be shaky and I might be shaking as well. So, and now coming to the question, caste does not play a role only when we are inside the university campuses or college. It also decides the chances of getting into that learning space as well. From our first day into those spaces, our profiling starts. So everyone would ask us our names. I will talk about Punjab and colleges in Canada. People would come to us and they would ask us about our name. And if I would cite my example, I would say that, oh, my name is Gurpreet Singh, and they would emphasize that, oh no, what's your full name? So that they can profile us, so that they can identify our status in the caste hierarchy. And even if we get into those institutes, they make sure that we do not survive in those spaces. There's always a cage built around us of caste, that the sole focus of which is to suffocate us, to not let us graduate, or to not let us into the real world and make our careers successful, and to suffocate us. And Dr. Pamposh is the recent example of that caste-based suffocation that she felt, and she committed suicide. And same goes with Rohit Vemula and Darshan Solanki. And these are not examples of some rural, not good reputed institutes. These were the elite institutes of India. So they are forced to kill themselves. And then I would like to. I have some opposing view from my fellow panelists. What I have witnessed is that whenever there's an incident of suicide, or someone is killed because of caste, there's always an attempt to erase that Dalit identity. Even in the case of Rohit Vemula, I remember all the BJP members, Smriti Irani and others, they tried to portray him as OBC so that the caste angle would be eliminated. But in reality, he was being discriminated because of caste. And same is the case with Dr. Pamposh. All students and faculty members united to say that there was no such discrimination. I have a friend who's studying in that institute. I also talked to him. He belongs to our community. I asked him if there's any discrimination or such thing. He said no, there's no such thing. But when I rephrased my question into something else, like, oh, did you ever get into a conversation where they blame reservation, or where they indirectly taunt you, or use your identity as a slur, or like make you feel embarrassed about yourself? He said, yeah, that's very common. So the thing is, our people, and even the dominant caste people, they do not understand how caste works, and they do not want to acknowledge the fact that it is still there. And there are a lot more examples that even when we get into those learning spaces, we are marked, or they will only see us as a Dalit, not a student. And even with the teachers or professors, they would mark our people low just because we belong to a certain community. And there are not many examples I have seen recently on social media that
we have to send.
People from our community, even when they score high on written exams or other exams, but they are marked so low in interviews. And the opposite happens with the people of dominant caste. If they have scored low in the written exam, they would be marked higher in interviews. So that's a contrast between both the communities, and also it happens because the hegemony in these elite institutes or the panels is of the upper caste dominant people. There's so many reports that in IITs, IIMs, only upper caste professors are teaching. So there's a huge gap that people are not getting into those institutes. If they are getting, and then they are killed in one way or another. That's it.
I'm grateful to be sharing this space with so many people who are doing some incredible work in the community. I think when we talk about student experiences, there's two elements that go into it, right? There's the interactions that a student has when they're in lectures and the way they interact with the professors. And then there's also the other aspect of student experiences, which is how students interact with each other outside the lecture room. And I think in both of those spaces, we see caste play out. Just coming sort of from personal experience, one of the first times I ever discussed caste with a student in Canada, it was in high school, and the way she described it was, this is how she described the caste system. She said, there's people like us who are at the top, and then there's people who clean our shoes. And that was generally how she centralized an entire community and the struggles of an entire community. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think it was really that interaction that motivated my own activism in this space. If that student had the opportunity to adequately engage with past conversations and had the opportunity to be properly educated on the subject, I wonder if she would have held the same kind of views. And so I think that there's two aspects that go into student experience, and if we want intellectual spaces that are comfortable for caste conversations, it's about working on both of those spaces.
Thank you so much. There's a couple of things in the very outset. I'm grateful to be here with everyone, and I'm grateful and thankful to be able to tell my story, because sometimes the stories are powerful when it comes from ordinary people, because that's what makes it different. And in my case, I would like to say, first thing first, my name is Manish, and originally I'm from Bodhgaya, India, Bihar. And when I came here to Canada as a graduate student at UPC Okhdfcbank, I had a very interesting experience there, because I thought wow, this is beautiful, space now. I finally have a time when I can pursue my path for knowledge here. But the very second week, there was a Diwali event where I ended up interacting with some Indian fellow students, and during the interaction, one of the fellow Indian students asked me, hey, what's your name? And I was like, yeah, my name is Manish, and then in a very from, I'm from here, XYZ. And then this student asked me okay, by the way, if you're from Bihar, could you please just can you tell me which caste are you from? And I was like, what do you mean? That's where I just got a little bit personal. And I was like, why would you like to know my caste? But rather than responding to the question, he ended up countering this hey, I'm from Thakur from UP. So I thought you're from Bihar, so it must be something different. And I'm anticipating something different. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that I not thought that this question will be asked when I arrived here, in campus like UBC especially, because I thought it's such a progressive, a different kind of campus, which it is, but still it has its own limitations when it comes to South Asian student. And I was doing some research along the South Asian student. So the number of Indian student is one of the fastest growing student here in the campus within the UBC, both Okanagan and Vancouver campus. And we have already surpassed many other countries, including China, of course, in many ways. In India is the most populous country, or here in the campus is the most populous student community. So during the research work, I did learn that there are very fascinating things happening here. When we have this many South Asian students, there is an obvious there are some baggages are coming with them. And one of the baggages is always there, the cultural identity of the caste identity. So when it happens with me, I went to my supervisor, he's a cultural anthropologist here at the University of Nottingham, and I shared my story. And he said, Manish, I'm so sorry to hear that this is happening with you here. Because he is well aware about what is caste system in India. He teaches a course in India at the Okhdfcbank campus. And whenever he teaches, whenever he brings this one specific topic, caste in India, the classroom has a different kind of vibe. Because majority of the student in that classroom is Indian student, but living in diaspora. So it's very fascinating because I was also the part of that coursework. And in the classroom, I still remember when this idea of, when this subject has started, a lot of the students say that they never heard or understood this certain practice. It doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, okay, there we go. It exists so well in there. It's a matter of like how I am open towards it, how much open I am, by the way. So anyway, fast moving forward, I ended up figuring out like if I want to raise this issue, I want to understand this more, then I have to find out where I can talk about this. And this is where my journey with UBC Okhdfcbank Equity Inclusion Office started. It was like a different kind of setting, but I also realized that UBC Okhdfcbank has this, UBC has this offices equity inclusion, what we call it here, and it is such an important space where actually we can go and discuss this kind of issues. However, when I started discussing this with the person there, they told me very directly and clearly that listen, UBC discrimination policies is a shadow of BC Human Rights Code. And one thing is very clear, that BC Human Rights Code does not affiliate caste within its own membrane, within its own setting. Which means that all the different kind of terms, whether based on gender, race, ethnicity, color, all the different things, but caste is missing. So I asked that person, is there any way I can do something? We can do something. And she told me that no, it's a little bit different in terms of putting together, because it's not like we can do it in this stage until it's go to the legislation stage. So I was like, okay, which means my journey is not going to be that easy here. So I'm really grateful that I have this platform where I can talk about this issue, that if this is one thing we want to talk about, we'll have to acknowledge that it exists, and it exists actually pretty strongly. It's a matter of like finding it and understanding it and bringing it to the table. So now, just 1 second, second part of the. So like my inspiration to engagement in this, it's all started with this my first experience when I came to Canada and meet this Indian fellow student and then having this interaction. However, I do hope that before we find the solution, we'll have to acknowledge that there is a problem. And here, while being in Canada, there's one thing I also learned while working at the Equity Inclusion Office, that there is no reconciliation if we don't acknowledge the truth. So truth always comes before reconciliation. And that's exactly implies here in this setting, that the first thing we have to do is to acknowledge that caste exists here in Canada, and it exists very strongly within the South Asian diasporic community, especially when we see that the number of South Asians, or in general, like other students or so-called immigrants are coming to Canada, then of course they're coming with their baggages, of course. So let's acknowledge that and let's find the ways to work through it. And we have a long journey, however, but I'm hopeful we will come to the destination. It's a matter of time. Thank you.
Sure. Could we? Oh, is that another mic? Okay, great. Then we can
So,
keep
yeah, we
this
can
one.
just
So
keep
please,
it.
please go for it.
So I forgot to say something previously. I have my own experiences of caste discrimination here in Canada, and all the time the environment becomes so toxic, whether I'm at educational institute, at home, or at workplace, that I have to self-ostracize me from the other members of other students or the colleagues. So I consider this as a modern form of untouchability, that we are compelled to exclude ourselves from the community, from mainstream. And other thing is that we all have read Dr. Ambedkar's autobiography, Waiting for a Visa. And since the day I have landed in Canada, I could relate to that autobiography more and more every day. That we remember that episode when Dr. Ambedkar was looking for an accommodation, and when he finally gets into a Parsi inn. I relate to that very incident, that we have finally gotten the visas, but we are still waiting for the dignity and equality even in Canada. So those visas for us didn't really help much, but let's hope and strive for that equality and dignity here in Canada as well. Thank you.
Yes.
To add on to what I said previously, I feel at the educational level in India, we are never really taught about our ancestry when it comes to lower castes. We actually do not read a lot about what happened exactly. A lot of history is lost, and we just maybe perhaps learn about one line, that is, these sections of communities have been oppressed for a long time, and this is why we have reservation. And maybe one figure at max, Baba Saheb, is who we learn about, but I feel a lot of Indian history when it comes to lower castes and their contribution towards fighting for the freedom and fighting for the upliftment of these communities is lost, and I think that is something we should be learning back in India at least. Not only something that we learn from our families, but also something that others should acknowledge, and educational settings should be talking about more.
Absolutely, there are so many great points here. I think since yesterday's panels, we've been hearing a lot about the importance of education, but also in terms of thinking about what kind of education, the point that Nitali just brought up, in addition to students' relationship to education, and thinking about Gurpreet's thinking around modern forms of untouchability in the social sphere, but also not just the social sphere, but also in your interactions in learning settings that Vipassana brought up. Maybe we'll pick up from where Manish left things off in terms of efforts within the EIO office and the emphasis on sort of adhering to the BC Human Rights Code. I know that we're working in order to, we've been in touch with the community groups here have been in touch with the BC Human Rights Commission to begin discussions on including caste as a protected category. But the UBC discrimination policy in its current iteration also says that they adhere to interpretations by the BC Human Rights Tribunal, which is why the recent case where damages were awarded is a hopeful sign. And we're hoping that that's the beginning of a recognition of caste. But going from that, I think the second question that I wanted to ask is, what sorts of actions have you been part of at the level of student clubs, unions, department, university admin, like the Equity and Inclusion Office, to ensure or to begin these conversations around protections against caste-based discrimination? What do you think your future plans and goals are? Dr. Benz, I would love for you to also be part of this conversation and tell us a little bit about your efforts at UFB.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments so far. I made lots of notes for us to reflect on, maybe on the 26th, but beyond that, I want to start by saying the Human Rights Code work that's going on by Jay and others is really seminally important in this work, so that we can have those kind of securities so that it becomes part of the legal framework of BC. So thank you for that. For the University of Fraser Valley, I guess we have 3 approaches, and I just want to share those with you and then talk a little bit about actions, what we're doing. So certainly, somebody brought up that a lot of people don't know how caste manifests itself in white European settler communities. They're not sure what is caste, how does it show itself up, where does it act. So we need to raise awareness within our institutions with providing educational opportunities for staff as well as faculty and students to talk about caste and understand caste. Second, we want to collaborate with other other intersectional groups on campus. For example, our race anti-racism work that Sean and I have done a lot of work on, and Rita, by the way, Rita started the race and anti-racism work at UFE. So continuing the intersectional work so that caste shows up if you're a woman, if you're of color, if you're facing racism and casteism. So we want to increase that intersectionality sphere of caste, not keep it separate from everything else. And say, oh, these people, they face this, and then these people face this. We don't want that to happen on campus. And third, we want to develop the policy. So in terms of the third, first and second, we are doing a number of initiatives. So we started, I'm on the union, the Faculty and Staff Association, the union at UFE. I'm the Vice President of Equity. And so we came up with a plan last year to do an equity audit. So the audit is of our own union's policies and bylaws, because we want the university to do an audit. So before we can get the university to do an audit, we need to do our own audit. And the union is the impetus to get the audit done. We tried as faculty and staff to get the university to do an audit. They are not agreeing. They are not interested in an equity audit. So we want to come from the union perspective, and hopefully by the time we are ready and our audit is done, the Human Rights Code will be changed or at least added to. So the equity audit will take about 6 months, and then we are doing then I will implement an equity survey in the fall, and this survey will be for faculty and staff to respond back. And caste is going to be a category in there, a question in there about how much do you know, what do you know, how are you affected, what more can we do? So those type of surveys. We want to do a census on campus. We want to know who is on campus. You know, a lot of employers like the university will say, you know, we don't discriminate. There's lots of equity policies, but you know, we are overrepresented by certain groups and underrepresented by others. It's shocking how in the janitorial staff there are lots of people of color, but you won't find them in senior management. And oh, nobody applies. Oh, we don't have enough people. So we have to look at the equity around from top all the way down. We hope to have the petition ready that Preeti talked about, that we will take to our president, but we will also take to the union. We will take to the membership to get the petition done and send it up to both the presidents, both the union and the university president. And then the big one is the support from BC Human Rights. We hope that I don't know, Jay, how long that process is, whether it's a year or 2 years, but we all need to be on that. So Jay, while you're meeting with them at a very high level, you know, tell us what we can do at the lower grassroots level to raise that awareness. Do I speak to my MLA? My MLA doesn't know anything about caste. I'm sorry, she's oblivious. And I don't blame her, it's not been in her world. But in our world, and we had 35% of the Aboriginal population is of Indian origin. Undivided India, you know, Pakistan and India, so before partition. So we have a huge population that we can go to say we need to educate the legislators in our and I would recommend for all of you to do that, to meet your MLAs and go tell them what we're doing, because they really don't know. They should know, wherever you are. It doesn't matter if your population is large or small. And then filter it up to if you get to DVDB, however, if you can do that. But so that's some of our work. We have a joint committee now on race and anti-racism on campus, and equity and diversity. So that's like faculty, staff, as well as management. Management sometimes becomes kind of separated from us, and they're in their ivory towers doing their work, and we want them to get into the messy world of what we're facing. So forcing them to come into what we're facing as an equal partner, not coming, of course their positions are what they are, but they're in a joint committee. No more hierarchy. The president joins the committee as well. I mean, there's no hierarchy there. We want everybody to understand what we're fighting against. And I bring it back, caste alone may not work in the university setting, but it'll work if we connect it to the other oppressed groups, if we get them engaged, if we get women's groups, Black Lives Matter, indigenous communities, people of color, wherever we see socioeconomic groups, disability groups, bring them all into and it's an educational process. Caste should be, every time we do an equity audit, caste should be in there. The other piece, and that's not to do with the university in the educational setting, but is that we need to get our cities engaged, our councillors and our mayors engaged on this conversation so we can change the laws in our cities as well. But it shows up. It shows up in Abbotsford for sure because we have a very large dominant community in Abbotsford. And they are swaggering around as if the world belongs to them. And they make no move or effort to be inclusive. Our gurdwaras, our mandirs, our mosques, everything is hierarchically organized. That's not where we find our strength. We sometimes think they should be the ones signing the petitions. I'm sorry, today I'm here to tell you, they're not the ones. Because they are not equipped, they're not trained, they don't have the education, they don't have the willpower. They think money has to come into the institution for it to work. Organized religion is probably one of the worst things in the world because it continues to perpetuate the caste hierarchy in our communities. And we all need to take that stand against organized religion. Sorry, on a rant.
Thank you, Professor. I also would like to add something right on that because since we're having all these dialogues around the whole the word and idea of equity and inclusion, so because as an international student, when I started working and being a part of the equity inclusion office at UPC Okanagan, I did learn something very fascinating. And I had no idea this kind of thing exists in the first place. So let me start at the very beginning. So I really enjoyed when international students arrive in Canada, we have a thing called orientation events. And we like to make them understand that how things works here. And I've been part of a couple of those orientation events when I was talking about our UBC policies around discrimination called SC7 or SC17. Especially these two policies are very critical here. And as a graduate student, I was basically dealing with the other incoming graduate student where I was discussing about why this matters and why it's critical to understand in the first place that as a teaching assistant or as a research assistant, you have certain limitations, we can't go beyond that. There's a conflict of interest involved, there's a certain thing. But I never realized that they don't have anything when it comes to understanding that half of the, when I was doing that, I realized that a lot of South Asian students there, and we're not talking about the certain Indian issues which comes with them. And especially most of the students after that, when I was having this dialogue, I also realized that part of the students never heard of the practices around LGBTQ here, or the practices around First Nation, or the practices around so-called in-campus, how things works differently than the Indian campuses, or so-called the educational system in India. So all I wanted to say is yes, we need to think in the institutional level how we can bring those discussions when we do orientations even at the very outset. That's the very first thing that we need to think of. And it's not just orientation in the campus, but also orientation when students from India or South Asia arrives in Canada or in North American setting. That how these things are so important to understand. Then moving forward, I also want to add here is that most of South Asian creates clubs here when they are, or when they come here, they're part of. They like to find the different kind of clubs, organizations where they can volunteer and engage. So what happened is that I have realized most of the clubs are focusing on things like, let's organize Indian events such as Diwali nights, Holi events, yoga, food practices, and so forth. But then we need to understand that India is not only a land of Bollywood and food. There is a much more than that. And that's where the problem is. That's where the communication gap is. There are a lot of South Asian students, when they come here, they don't necessarily go there to discuss about some of the other, question based around language, question based around identity, question around this whole idea of caste itself. So I did talk to my supervisor while I'm studying anthropology. I have a deep interest in all this subject. So I did talk to my supervisor that why it's not kind of working along these lines, how we can do that. But of course, there are certain limitations. So I don't want to go deeper into that. But coming from that certain background at the EI office at UBC Okanagan, I did realize that there's a long way to go. And I have been talking to my boss there in the office, but I think in the next orientations, we could have some workshops. And I would be more than happy to be able to be part of a workshop where I would like to talk and discuss about the Indian caste system and how there is similarity, the difference between caste and race itself, so that we can invite more different audiences and have a more like open dialogues, that how there are different things that we need to be aware of. Thank you.
Just to take 1 minute, it's a beautiful segue from what you've said, Manish. When we started the concepts of racism in anti-racism work in the 90s, we used to say, stop doing dinner, dress, and dance. Just stop these. For 20 years, you've been doing samosas. Have you done anything else? Have you talked about people's lives and what they're facing? And teachers and others would say, no, I'm just happy to do dinner dress. Wear the bindi, put the sari on, bring the samosa, and then so. Your point is well taken. That there are sometimes you have to start with food, but that's not where it should end. You have to start with festivals, but that's only one small microcosm of what we need to do. So I take your comments really well that it also intersects around issues of anti-racism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's wonderful that you touch on the fact that when we have South Asian clubs, they're just very superficial, and it's definitely a criticism that I also have at the University of Calgary. I think one of the, sort of speaking a little bit more broadly, I think when we talk about caste discourse, there's this idea that caste is something that's of the past, and so we no longer need to discuss it. And in my experience, that's one of the biggest challenges of addressing caste as a legitimate problem. Too often, it's relegated to like the abyss of history, that this is just something that our ancestors dealt with. This is just one aspect of Indian history. We don't need to recognize it any longer. And there's not a lot of contemplation around the contemporary legacies, the things that we have to still deal with. I worked on the Caste in Canada project, which was organized, it was organized by Dr. Anne Murphy and Dr. Suraj Gangde. It was based in UBC and had community collaborators like the Jigna Association. But just that kind of work, I think, is incredibly important, because what we were doing was we were interviewing people in Canada of the Dalit background, and essentially asking them, like, how was your migration experience like? How did caste influence that story? And how does it still continue to influence that story? And our hope is that by interviewing people, by having those discussions one-on-one, we can give a little bit more legitimacy to caste, both as an academic concept and as a very personal concept that we all deal with in our lives.
Unfortunately, I am not enrolled in any educational institutes anymore, and I wasn't part of any club or organization during my college time. But now I'm part of a human rights organization that works towards the rights of Dalits and Adivasis. The Southern organization, it's a Toronto-based organization, and recently we were able to secure a historic motion in one of the, actually the largest school board, Toronto District School Board, that has approved the motion to address caste-based discrimination in schools of Toronto, and they have given this task to Ontario Human Rights Commission to develop a framework to address that discrimination in those educational spaces. It is one of the Toronto District School Board oversees more than 600 schools, and almost 1/4 of the population is of South Asian descent. So it becomes important, and it is really historic that we were able to secure it. Other than that, I have been vocal about these caste issues in Canada and also in India. I have gotten some really good platforms to talk about it, like the one I'm talking about, caste in UBC. Also, I got chance to share a platform with Mr. Jayabirdi several times, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
worst failed attempt was made in high school when I was the secretary of the debating club, and we were discussing about the topics that should be talked about, and I proposed talking about the caste system because why not? And my teacher was not really happy with that, and she said maybe perhaps how about we go about we should not have reservation, and eventually for the upcoming events, although I had won one of those state level debate competitions, for the upcoming same debate competition they dropped me from the list. Fast forward to college life, I was pretty vocal about these things, but I wasn't actively a part of any membership as a from a club or anything. But now coming to UBC, I'm extremely thankful to Preeti and Jay for giving me this opportunity to be involved in this project, because I have been really looking forward to work on something like this. Even my UBC application had instances where I really wanted to do something on these, and I'm also working on policies in my assignments, taking references from my professors for possible policies that we could come up with to address manual scavenging currently, and I think so far it's been a very good journey.
I again forgot to add something. I'm very bad at remembering things, so sorry. Yeah, so we are currently collecting testimonials of people who have faced caste-based discrimination in Canada. It is also with the aim to build a community, and we are hoping to use these testimonials for other purposes as well, like to educate others, and also if these testimonials could help Ontario Human Rights Commission in any way to come up with better framework. So if any of you have any such experiences, please come forward. And what I have experienced is that our people do not come forward. They are either afraid or it's because of the system. Their identity is being stigmatized. So please come forward. And I wish I would have met more such people during my college time. My life and my college time would have been much more easier with lot less trauma as well. Thank you.
I do think the reason we've all gathered is to make and remake community, in my opinion. So I'm glad we all found each other. I just wanted to really quickly say that there are so many important, different kinds of strategies that have come up in all of the things that you're saying. Independent research projects, work at equity and inclusion offices, equity audits. I'm thinking about institutional work here at UBC, as well as work with the Toronto District School Board. And so there are some contrasts that are interesting too. Here at UBC policy, we've been told that we adhere to the Human Rights Code, but in Toronto, the District School Board has made a recommendation to human rights in Ontario. So it's kind of interesting the various sort of directions in which we can advocate for this change. And one of the things that we're trying to do is passing around 2 petitions for you all to sign, which is a show of support for us to push for protections against caste-based discrimination at our university spaces, UFV as well as UBC. That's what we're trying to do, and we'll use that both with our institutions here, but also as a way to demonstrate the support that we have to BC human rights as well. So that's what we're trying to do through the petitions, and if you could sign them, that would be incredible. I just want to take a minute to say that we were expecting a panelist to join us in person, but I'm so happy that they've been able to join us online. Prem Paril is an alumnus of California State University, East Bay, which has accomplished this task of including caste as a protected category, and Prem has been at the forefront of this. We haven't had the chance to meet Prem. Hello, I am very glad to meet you online, and thank you so much for your work. If you could please weigh in with your comments, we would love that.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so sorry. I wish to be there in person, but so as you know, we are working hard for California bill SB 403. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, this California bill SB 403. We are we are working hard for that deal.
हाँ जी, मुझे अपनी जगह हो जाती है।